The conflict in Palestine and Israel, in Ukraine, the upcoming US election are among some of the things that seem to have pushed the conflict in Sudan further down the world's agenda. And that's visible just from the lack of support for people there in the transit camp. And also politically, the lack of international pressure on the warring generals in Sudan to come to the table. So it's going on and causing a massive humanitarian catastrophe. I'm Malcolm Webb, I'm a senior correspondent. Sudan's often been described as the world's forgotten crisis. We went there, and between us, it's tragic. The rapid support forces and the army have turned against each other. The generals leading them, both vying for power. That has forced about 8 million people from their homes. About 18 million people are facing acute food shortages. The conditions had just got so bad that people were left with little choice but to flee. And one of the only places they could flee to was southwards. So a lot of the people arriving in the town of Renk had very long journeys. Some of them have fled multiple times. A lot of the people that we spoke to had tried to hold out to keep their property, their shops or their homes, and survived through most of a year of fighting. But then things had got so bad that they decided to flee. At the same time, many of the displaced people don't want to leave the border area because they don't want to have to rebuild their lives in remote, long-term refugee settlements in South Sudan. That is one of the reasons why the transit camp is just growing bigger and bigger, because they hope that things will get better soon so that they will be able to return home. But from what we know of the conflict in Sudan and the stalled progress of peace talks, that doesn't seem very likely. When you're on the ground, you do get the feeling that it's a forgotten crisis. Firstly, the lack of humanitarian support given the numbers of people that are passing through Renk, the numbers of people that are displaced, and then from the humanitarian workers there, you get a certain sense of exasperation. You get this sense that this is really bad. People saying that they'd also survived fighting but were getting hungry in their homes because they were cut off from essential supplies, including food. And people just aren't paying attention. Like the world's not getting it. One woman's son, she said, had been detained and beaten and interrogated by the rapid support forces. They wanted him to join. Eventually, the commander released her son. She said that was the last straw. They sold their last possessions, borrowed some more money so that they could get on a bus, head south to the border. We barely saw any other journalists. One plane brought in journalists one day and took them away again the following day, and we were lucky to have a whole week on the ground because in such a situation there are many things that you don't get to understand until you've been there for a few days or you get to meet more people. One afternoon we were filming in the transit camp, filming some of the very basic shelters there, which are kind of made of tattered plastic sheets and rags. And a young man came up to us. His name was Mohammed. He'd said that he'd been there for almost a year. He was one of the first people to flee when the conflict started. But just before he had fled, he'd completed a university course in journalism. And he was really excited to see us there in the transit camp with a camera, doing our work. So we ended up hiring him. We worked with him a little bit over the following days. In spite of having lost everything, having lived in a house made of bricks and come from a family that could afford to send him to university, now living in a shelter made of tattered plastic sheets and depending on humanitarian aid to get by. But that hadn't dented his ambitions one bit. He was determined to keep going and to tell the story of what had happened to his community and to others in an environment where there's much to be sad about, which can be really quite depressing at moments. To find someone who is, I guess, so bright and so determined and so unfazed by the circumstances, it's inspiring. In the worst crises, you get glimpses of the very best and the very worst of humanity. It's a real lesson in human resilience.